All right, let's get to the first George Clooney directed film that I'll be discussing, which is The Monuments Men from 2014. Stars a huge cast, George Clooney as well, Matt Damon, Bill Murray, Cate Blanchett, John Goodman, Jean Dujardin, Hugh Bonneville, Bob Balaban, and the synopsis is: an unlikely World War II platoon is tasked to rescue art masterpieces from German thieves and return them to their owners. Talking about George Clooney as a director, and then I'll circle back around to The Monuments Men. He's been directing for a while, and over the last 10 years or so, he's primarily been directing. Occasionally, he will act in them too, but not always. I grew up watching his films. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was a family favorite. We watched that maybe once or twice a year. And he is an actor. Of course, that's how he got his start. I guess you could say he is one of those classic kind of movie stars where he's never really been a part of, aside from the Ocean's trilogy, he's never been a part of a big franchise. Yeah, he was Batman once, but that didn't go well, of course. When it comes to filmmaking for him, I want to like his movies more than I do. Generally, there are some that I like, and even in his weaker films, I can tell he's passionate about it. He's not just a jobber, doing it for the heck of it. I can tell he has some sort of good intention to do it, but it just doesn't always seem like it turns out the way he wants or maybe thinks it does. His films pretty much always have pretty strong cinematography, considering he is also fairly active in politics. His stories deal with media and politics, like the Ides of March. There's underdog stories in there, a somewhat Coen Brothers-esque Americana feel. As for The Monuments Men, I saw this in theaters. When it was announced, I read the book because I have read a lot of World War II history over the years. I try and do that as consistently as I can. The book is great. Overall, I think the movie is okay. The story, as the synopsis says, it's this true story about these people who went into the European battleground in World War II to try and save various art pieces, masterpieces from hundreds of years ago or more, because the Nazis were destroying everything in their path, and they wanted to eliminate as many art pieces that certain groups had been a part of, or certain countries, or take them all for themselves. And I've never really seen a film tackle something like that before, so in that way it's unique. But the way that the book is structured is that it's kind of broken into chapters, in the sense of each chapter is a different mission, kind of. It's not necessarily one narrative where it's the same people doing the same things. And unfortunately, they adapted the book pretty faithfully, which makes the narrative feel very messy. You're never really getting much time to know anyone in particular, or even know who the main character is. I guess George Clooney is, considering he's the one that rounds up the team, but even he's not involved in all the different art rescue missions. And another prevalent issue that I find in George Clooney's films is tone. There are so many instances where the tone feels off or very uneven within the context of a whole movie. I don't mind a retro, like classic Hollywood World War II story, like The Great Escape, for example, but then it'll jump back and forth between that kind of style to a pretty modern, emotional, dramatic, edgy feel. So it's hard to say, okay, am I supposed to be having fun with this movie? Is it supposed to be thought-provoking? The run-ins with different people in Europe who they're not sure if they can trust. Sometimes they run into enemy soldiers. And even though they may not be fighting the war itself, they're still in quite a lot of danger. The most heartfelt scene, not that it works, again, tonally, but the one at the camp when there's the song playing over the speakers, The third act, when they're dealing with the mine filled with gold and all these priceless artworks and trying to get it out in time before the Russians show up, because the Americans aren't even sure that the Russians are going to treat the artwork with respect. 3 out of 5. All right, let's get to Suburbicon from 2017, written by the Coen brothers. It stars Matt Damon, Julianne Moore, Oscar Isaac, Noah Jupe, and the synopsis is, as a 1950s suburban community self-destructs, a home invasion has sinister consequences for one seemingly normal family. The Coen brothers, who are incredible filmmakers, they've written a handful of scripts that they don't end up directing, which they should just stop doing, in my opinion. It never turns out as well as if they direct the films. I saw it in theaters, and I've seen it a couple of times since. I actually like this movie a decent bit. It is quite flawed, but I seem to like it more at this point than most do. As I said with The Monuments Men, tone is the biggest problem here. And that's what the Coen brothers do better than almost anyone when they're directing, is they can insert humor into practically any situation. No matter how dark, how sad, they can just do that seamlessly. You could definitely call it a dark comedy satire because it deals with this very nice suburban neighborhood, all of which are white residents, and then a black family moves in. There's a lot of racism, of course, and when problems start appearing for various reasons, the black family gets blamed while some of the white people who are actually at fault are looked over. The cast is very good in this across the board. Love Julianne Moore. She's one of my favorite all-time actors. She's been in so many things and done such a great variety. I just love to see her even in the smallest role. Matt Damon, a very frequent collaborator with George Clooney. This movie looks amazing. The color palette, just very, very vibrant. The look of that neighborhood. The costume design, same thing. Everything with Matt Damon having these panic attacks all the time when he's realizing all this crazy stuff is going on and he's not really strong enough to beat it by himself. The friendship between the white boy and the black boy in the neighborhood, and how there's no animosity because they don't understand the idea of racism or why there would be any of that prejudice, and so they get along until their parents intervene. The jokes of Matt Damon riding away on a little tricycle or bicycle, and when he's sitting at the table near the end, completely bloodied and just eating a sandwich, like there's some good humor there. Like I can't help but laugh. 3.5 out of 5. All right, let's get to The Midnight Sky from 2020. It is a Netflix original film. Stars George Clooney, Felicity Jones, David Oyelowo, Kaylin Springle, Kyle Chandler, Damian Bashir. And the synopsis is, this post-apocalyptic tale follows Augustine, a lonely scientist in the Arctic, as he races to stop Sully and her fellow astronauts from returning home to a mysterious global catastrophe. It's, without a doubt, my least favorite George Clooney directed film to date, with the main reason being it is so dull. It takes forever to get going. The first act feels like an hour. The relationship between George Clooney, who is very good, he can do anything from the energetic, peppy character to a dark, solemn one like he is here. The relationship between him and the young girl is not interesting, mainly because the girl is almost a non-character. She doesn't really speak. She doesn't even use sign language or anything. She doesn't nod her head yes or no. So she's just kind of there for George Clooney to spout off lines to. That's what I felt like. I don't know if that's how it is in the book. Could be an interesting read, but in terms of the adaptation, a big misfire there. The setup is interesting. I like this evacuation from this scientific center in the Arctic. George Clooney stays behind and sees that this young girl was accidentally left there. Then while that's happening, there's a spaceship coming back to Earth, but they don't know about this disaster that's happened. So George Clooney is trying to warn them. The group of astronauts, so bland. I like all the actors there, Felicity Jones, and everybody is decent, but they have nothing to do. There's no real excitement or suspense for the most part, even though I think it's trying to have that. The journey when they get out of the Arctic Center across the wilderness landscape just becomes about survival. The ideas otherwise are non-existent. And there were a few moments here and there that worked. There was some Spielbergian-esque stuff, like the dinner scene at the center when they're flicking the green peas at each other, the snowstorm or blizzard towards the middle, I think, when they're clinging to life, the emergency sequence on the spaceship in the latter half. The final few moments with Clooney and the girl were nice, but too little too late. The effects of space looked pretty nice. The spaceship itself, the look of the planets. Light 2 out of 5. Let's get to The Tender Bar from 2021. It's a Amazon original movie. Stars Ben Affleck, Ty Sheridan, Daniel Ranieri, Lily Rabe, Christopher Lloyd, Max Martini, and the synopsis is: a boy falls under the unconventional tutelage of his uncle, a charismatic, self-educated bartender. Biggest thing, it's not a terrible movie, but as the synopsis says, it's about this boy. It cuts back between him as a young kid and then college age, and he has this dysfunctional family, this asshole absent father, and a mother who is fluctuating kind of with health and other things, struggling to be a single mom, and he has this cool uncle who helps him through his childhood and then after as well. There's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's a sweet film. I don't have anything against this guy, but I don't really get why this was made or published as a memoir. There's so little new about it. Maybe they took out a lot of things from the source material that would have added more identity and freshness to it, but once he gets to college, he meets a girl, and he's struggling to fit in, and he meets this oddball group of guys, and it felt after a while like it was writing itself. I was waiting the entire time for something very substantial to happen. Say, okay, I get this now. This is crazy. I cannot believe this guy got through this. No offense, you could throw a rock and probably find someone who has gone through the same story, which I guess that's relatable in a sense, but as a film, a Hollywood film, it's pretty predictable and vanilla. Performance-wise, most people were good. Ben Affleck was great. He's one of those actors who, when he really cares, he's awesome. And he's also a very good director. The young kid was probably the best performance, very compelling. Ty Sheridan, who I kind of go in and out on, kind of hit and miss. I don't know if it was his fault or the writing's fault, but he just seemed very uninvested. I just did not connect with him at all. It was shot well, and I like how George Clooney, he changes his visual style to fit the movie. It takes place in the 70s and 80s and feels like a 70s, 80s movie, very Robert Altman-esque. 2.5 out of 5. All right, let's get to the last George Clooney directed film to date, which is The Boys in the Boat from 2023. Stars Joel Edgerton, Talon Turner, Peter Guinness, Sam Strike, Thomas Elms. And the synopsis is a 1930s set story centered on the University of Washington's rowing team from their Depression-era beginnings. Another first-time watch for me. I'm always up for a underdog, inspirational sports story, and it's always nice when you may not have interest in that sport specifically, but it's still just as entertaining. I've never been a rower myself. I've never been at a school where there was rowing or known anyone who has rowed, so very outside of that world. And of this group, this is by far George Clooney's best. It's a classic story told in a classic way. It's predictable, yes, but it feels sincere, and basically every sports story is predictable. You know that they're probably going to win in the end. The 1930s setting looks great. The setup with Talon Turner being this pretty much homeless kid whose mother has died and father left him. He's about to be kicked out of school unless he can pay for the tuition, so he decides to go for broke and try to get on the rowing team. Unsurprisingly, he does. And then he finds out, if you know anything about rowing, it's one of the most grueling sports physically, and you have to be in, complete unison with everybody else, and the endurance is just insane. So all the new kids coming onto the team or trying to get onto the team learn that very quickly. There's also your standard training montages and the problems that the rowers face outside of the sport while in school. All of the rowing sequences, both when they're doing the tryouts and the practices, as well as the actual matches, there's a lot of great overhead shots. Everything feels clean and engaging and fun and suspenseful. You don't learn a lot about other people other than Talon Turner, but they're still in it so much that you feel at least somewhat familiar with them. Very good score by Alexander Desplat. It was an interesting touch when in the Olympic Games at the end, because this is before World War II, Clooney makes a point of showing Adolf Hitler in the stands because Germany was competing. 4 out of 5.